BlizzCon 2023 has come and gone, and with it, so many questions and concerns are left in the minds of those reading the news and information coming out of it. While many who attended left feeling rejuvenated and fulfilled, I fully believe those of us watching and analyzing from a distance had a moderately less sunny disposition on what was presented. While I'm going to hold off on discussing the Overwatch and Diablo announcements, as I've never effectively covered either, what we are going to talk about today are the announcements for World of Warcraft, and in particular, the Season of Discovery. Before we get into specifics, let's address how this needs to be handled. Criticism should be levied at the company itself, and never at any individual employees or persons. I may make rare exception to this with the executives of Activision Blizzard, and in particular Metzen, with certain criticisms, but these are kept to a professional level and never personal. I think it's vital to remind everyone, myself included, that the targeting of individual employees, especially on a personal basis, is unacceptable and should never be done. The first point I'd like to cover on the subject of the Season of Discovery is the expectation some of us had going into it. Many of us had kept up with the leaks, which we now know to have been false, of World of Warcraft Revelations, the supposed Classic Plus we were looking at receiving. While many of us were excited at the prospect of the idea of completing vanilla in this fashion, with ogres and high elves as playable groups, along with the completion of many unfinished zones like Highjaw and Quel'Thalas, this turned out to be untrue. The point I'd like to make with this is that we cannot hold Season of Discovery to this potential bar we had hoped for. Don't get me wrong, it was a great idea, and I certainly hope groups like Turtle Wow capitalize on Blizzard not moving in that direction. But to say Season of Discovery failed just because it didn't do that, I feel wouldn't be fair right off the bat. I do feel it's not going to be good, but that's on its own merits and not based on a bar they didn't set. Described by PC Gamer as not quite Classic Plus, but the next best thing, and by Dexterto as the news WoW Classic players were waiting for, quote unquote, the Season of Discovery builds on the original World of Warcraft Classic with a level cap of 25, random extra things to do around the current world, and many new ways to play your class. No new race inclusions, no cut classes being brought in, no new zones or instances or raids, at least at launch, just world minigames, low-level instances being cranked up to raid difficulty, and what I can only describe as a partial retailification of the classes. Let's handle the easy stuff first here. The whole discovery part of Season of Discovery, where you go around the world, find interesting things, and complete puzzles and activities to unlock new parts of your class and customize your character further. I'm going to start off by comparing this to two things. The first being World Quest from Legion and BFA, and I'm instantly going to think this is a bad idea. World Quests were a fill to try and either A, get your legendary weapon more power drop by drop, or B, the only way you could barely creep your item level up between getting locked out of doing stuff in BFA. If that's what the discovery part is going to feel like, then this is already a sinking ship, and should be abandoned before it even hits the water. The second thing I'm going to compare this to is Archaeology and Cataclysm, which, while it had its decent share of flavor and fill, was barely utilized, and felt more like a chore back in the day than something meaningful. The pile of useless artifacts you acquired just to throw away or vendor alone was embarrassing on its own merits, and makes me hope that the rewards, which admittedly we know are in at least partially the class unlocks, are more meaningful. With these being the best examples to follow on this feature, I don't feel hopeful for this being something classic players, who generally like game mechanics and features to be clunky and basic, but also providing meaningful benefits and throughput for the characters, will appreciate. There will be unique PvP engagements and scenarios, and while they're unique in filling the world with more activity, I have little faith they're going to be doing something the classic community sticks with. Here's an example. Honorable kills that happen in Ashenvale will build up to eventually summoning NPC commanders that each faction need to protect and attack, with the event overall providing strong gear and material rewards for the winning faction. This is a good idea on paper, a recreation and reinforcement of the absolute mess, affectionately, that was the original Hillsbrad engagements back in the day. The problems here, however, are twofold. The first issue I see coming up is, because of how incredibly large and spread out Ashenvale is, there simply won't be enough PvP to generate interest in this. Expecting people to be satisfied with a level 25 cap and then hoping they sit around Ashenvale without mounts, trying to kill each other, isn't something I see flying at all. People are just going to log back over to Hardcore Classic or Turtle and play their mains. The other potential issue I see happening is that of those who do stick around to participate in PvP zones or activities like this on Season of Discovery servers. One faction will gain some kind of consistent upper hand. Due to population, participation, or something more nuanced as know-how or communication, one faction will come out as a clear dominator of this PvP event and discourage the other faction from participating. It may not always be Horde on every server or alliance, but even with Battlegrounds, we see this happening regularly, which is why even on Classic, Blizzard maintained the server group architecture for Battlegrounds. Their method of implementation doesn't reasonably support single server environments. Next, let's look at the initial level cap and how they'll be reintroducing some instances as smaller scale raids. Once again, on paper, I actually really like this idea. The concept of expanding the difficulty scaling and making instances into more UBRS or Zul'Gurub-like experiences is something I think is both fascinating and engaging. More group play dynamics and heavier requirements for getting things done encourages larger guilds, more active player bases, and a better understanding of what each other is capable of. What I don't love is that this is just taking one of the mid-20s instances and upscaling it for all we know. I hope I'm wrong about this, and I also hope Blizzard gets a lot more creative with how they approach this, making most instances at least 10-mans, and expanding things like Scarlet Monastery and Dire Maul into full-blown raids of some kind, possibly that 20-man ZG point I mentioned earlier. I would love to see even something as low as Dead Mines, which we all know is abbreviated to VC, not DM, gets expanded upon to become an overcomplicated 10-man, with additional bosses and mechanics you need to deal with. If Blizzard can really double down and build on this idea, it could be a major strength for the Season of Discovery, but if it's done half-heartedly, and scaling is handled plainly and without adding to the dungeon, it could easily become one of the most glaring weaknesses. Now, for the Ascension-sized elephant in the room with all of this, Season of Discovery also includes unlockable new ways to play your favorite class. Healing mages, tanking warlocks, and many other new combinations are touted as the major feature for this new Classic Plus season. This is where I think the most of us who are dedicated to the WoW Classic idea start to have serious issues with this for a multitude of reasons. Let's peel through them. The first is, at face value, this really starts to feel like what the Ascension project has been working on for many years now. It's on a shallow level. The depth of customization for each class in Season of Discovery is very limited compared to the complex systems that Ascension offers, but still, I can only imagine the devs over at Ascension, as well as its loyal player base, is calling foul on this one. Ascension, for those that don't know, is the classless realm that's been running for a few years now, offering people the ability to build their own characters from scratch using the pools of all talents, skills, and abilities of all classes. The concept of Season of Discovery appears to use the concept of class manipulation from Ascension, but to my next point, butchers it with retail mess and excess. When looking over the actual class customization options themselves, now that more details have come out about them, we can see a lot of retailification happening. A lot of the new ways to play, quote-unquote, feel like the changes that hit retail during Mists of Pandaria and Warlords of Draenor, while the player base was tanking and there was a legitimate struggle to form groups as certain classes were being played to such a lesser extent. Some of the changes look fun, Shaman getting a more structured tanking skill set finally, for example. Mage, one of their highlighted classes, actually looks pretty interesting, as it's very similar to Shadow Priest healing, but that feels like an exception to the rule rather than the rule itself. Also, silly side note on healing mages, it's using a ton of chronomancy, which last we checked in the vanilla era was 100% a no-no according to the Bronze Dragonflight. It's a minor nitpick, but I can't not be specific with lore. Many of the new runes for almost every single class, from warrior to warlock, are mostly just taking skills from later expansions, including Cataclysm and Mist of Pandaria, and applying them to Classic, with a fresh coat of mathematical paint on them. Warlocks, for example, are getting things like Haunt, Chaos Bolt, and Metamorphosis. Druids are getting Life Bloom, Lacerate, and Wild Growth. These aren't new skills or developments for each class, and while one could easily argue that there's nothing wrong with pulling from future developments for classes in this regard, I would say otherwise. Two of the biggest problems that retail has had over the years are layers and layers of excessive class feature and power creep. For example, a warrior who plays Classic and Vanilla knows that for mobility in combat, you need to hit Berserker stance and intercept. However, a warrior that plays retail can just charge in combat. Season of Discovery offers the Warbringer rune for warriors, letting them charge, intercept, and intervene in combat, and also using any of the three in any stance, removing one of the major reasons you learn proper stance dancing. In addition, for warriors, another rune allows the use of Thunderclap in any stance, including Berserker, again removing another reason a tank or DPS needs to learn proper stance dancing. On top of all of that, Rune of Devastate. It converts a warrior's Sunder armor into Devastate, making it so they just smash one button to tank instead of expecting warriors to learn proper Fury Prot skills as they level. These things sound ridiculous to complain about, but this excessive power creep and convenience suddenly being injected into Classic really is a hyper-retailification of the product, and shows Blizzard doesn't actually care or understand the vanilla Classic community in any way. Shadow Strike for rogues, Divine Storm for paladins, Lava Lash for shamans, Chimera Shot for hunters. All of these are massive convenience or power creep changes that retail put in place between Wrath and Mists, and they should all be kept out of Vanilla and Classic at all costs. I don't understand why the Classic team, when all they had to do was continue building on the Vanilla world in some way, decided this was a good idea. It's insulting and infuriating, and while I'll probably give Season of Discovery a month to try out in December, it's going to be more to be fair to it and give it a chance than out of legitimate interest. More than anything, it's clear that, even with Metzen back at Blizzard, there is no more legitimate Classic or Vanilla team or knowledge there anymore. If you want a legitimate Classic Plus or Vanilla WoW experience, head over to Turtle WoW, where the team is developing Vanilla in so many incredible and true-to-era ways. Ascension, as mentioned before, as well as Epoch, are much more true to TBC and Wrath, although they're contained in what they do in the vanilla world, and also deserve to be explored. And hey, let's just not start on the idea of Cataclysm Classic. The whole damn point of Classic was to go back to a time before the Cataclysm, when the world changed forever, permanently, for the worst. The Cataclysm brings Classic into the retail era, and will be a colossal waste of time and resources. It is antithetical to the concept of Classic WoW. Overall, my prediction is this. Hardcore Classic will continue to prop up and be a revenue generator for Blizzard, but Cataclysm Classic and Season of Discovery will peter out quickly, necessitating a closure of those development teams. And I'll clarify, I'm not hoping anyone loses their job. That's a pain and anguish we've seen throughout the gaming and content creation industries over the last few years far too often. I'm simply pointing out, due to how I feel the reaction will be to both Cata Classic and Season of Discovery, there isn't going to be a reasonable path forward for either of them. I'm open to being wrong on this, but neither of these are vanilla anymore, and not in a good way. Thank you for joining me for this discussion piece on the Season of Discovery and Cataclysm for Classic. It's unfortunate we're not getting any kind of Classic Plus as we expected, but thankfully for those of us who do want a Vanilla Plus experience, we have places like Turtle Wow. If you've enjoyed this discussion, consider subscribing here at youtube.com/TheDanNation as I produce Warcraft lore videos and presentations weekly. From the Lore Bunker here in Boston, Massachusetts, good night and good luck.